So welcome to the Open Forum on Sustainable Economic Growth. My name is Michael Overdoon, and I've organized today's event, which is brought to you by DiscoveryLab, which provides an independent, apolitical platform to hear from the candidates today that are competing for seats in the House of Commons. We're an open community of over 240 entrepreneurs and scientists who are working together for solutions to tackle climate change and diseases, including cancer and COVID-19. We have about 190 advisors who help us navigate hurdles to forming and growing companies. And our events are also sponsored by the Edmonton Regional Innovation Network. Before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge that we are situated on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the First Nations and the Métis people. And today we've invited the candidates from each of the major parties to present their views and plans for developing a sustainable economy in Alberta and Canada. And I'd like to thank them for putting their names forward for public office. They each have 20 minutes, including time for questions. We've asked them to introduce themselves and talk about their platform and plans. And we would ask each of our participants to please ask questions, entering them into the chat space, and we'll ask you in turn to pose those questions to the candidates to have a free and open discussion today. The first session is moderated by Ramin Sikander. She is a student here at the University of Alberta, and she'll be moderating the talks by the first two candidates. Ramin, feel free to start the first session.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ramin. I'm a student at the U of A, as Michael said. Fun fact, I will be working the polls on Monday, and I'm excited to hear what you two have to say. So to begin with our first presenter, we'll have Adam Brown, who's a Liberal candidate for Edmonton West.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me today. Is the screen up? Are we good to go? Okay. So yeah, I'm Adam Brown. I'm your Liberal candidate here in Edmonton West. And, I haven't ran this by the party. So I just want to state that I am, these are my views, not necessarily the views of the Liberal Party. I'm sure they'll overlap quite a bit. Yeah, so about me, just real quick, I'm a CEO of a nanotech company here in Edmonton called Nanolog Audio. It's a quantum electronics startup. We're building ultraviolet sensors at the moment that could be used for hydrogen-based applications, methane flames, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I got my MBA at the University of Alberta, my BCom University of Alberta. I used to be a drummer in a Juno winning band, so my background's kind of all over the place. Lived in Edmonton my whole life. Lucky to be a top 40 under 40. And so, I was like, Adam, did you hit your head? Why are you going into politics? This is literally what I've heard at the doors. But I've seen so much potential in Edmonton and Alberta. In my time as CEO, I've been through DiscoveryLab, Creative Destruction Lab. I've seen, Startup TNT. I've seen so much potential in Edmonton, Alberta, in our companies here, and I want to help raise the tide for all innovators. That's something I'm very passionate about. I've also been very frustrated with the leadership I've seen here in the province. And that's kind of been a motivator to actually get involved, So it's been a very exciting time. Why Liberal? Also, this comes up a lot. I do align with a lot of the core values in terms of diversity, human rights, and respecting arts and science. Also, whether Alberta wants it or not, the Liberals are the ones likely to still run the country, and we have no representation in this party. And I think, that's a huge detriment to our community. Can't even advocate for our community in the discussions that lead the country. And while we don't elect many Liberals here in Edmonton, the few we do, I do find going to achieve some pretty amazing things. So what's my dream? If I get elected, I would love to bring us $1 billion for innovation funding. That would be a very big personal goal. Because when we had Amarjeet and Randy Boissonneau in 2015, we got billions of dollars for LRT. We got billions of dollars in Trans Mountain. But I want an economic driver to help move us forward. So that's something I'm very passionate about. When it comes to sustainability, a lot of what I learned was through my MBA program with Dr. Joel Gaiman. Great program. And it's like, sustainability is what you're doing. Can you continue to do it indefinitely? And if you look at the Alberta economy as it is today, the answer is probably no. But there's also, respecting the triple bottom line, which is, are your decisions is respecting people, the planet, and profits, and when you think about investments like Trans Mountain Pipeline, I do think it touches, it's a balanced approach that hits all these kind of targets. It's touching, it's getting new access to diversified markets, it's getting a better price for our oil. It's, an economic driver for First Nations communities. It provides a lot of jobs, and it's been extremely environmentally regulated. So kind of like investments like those, the balanced approach, I can get behind. But there is an elephant in the room when it comes to talking about the economy. And that elephant is, of course, COVID-19, because it's hard to think and talk about sustainable growth when we have the brakes on. We're in a state of emergency at this moment. So how do you, it's really hard to grow when we're like preventing an economic collapse at this moment. And I think, the best way to get there is getting vaccinated. And if you haven't been vaccinated, I would encourage you to do so. In Canada, we have been leaders here. And I've heard this from numerous of my, the business community that I know personally, that they need the vaccine passports because they want their customers to feel safe. They want their staff to feel safe. And until that happens, you can't really talk about sustainable economic growth, because we just need to get our economy going. We're at the brakes right now. How do we just get going again? And I think the Liberal Party has been there in a lot of ways, in terms of, almost 25% of Albertans supported by CERB, over 10 billion in the wage subsidy, close to 2 billion in the recovery benefit, and over $6 billion in the CEBA loans. And I guarantee someone, a company that has, been supported by these programs. So I think there's been very strong leadership at the top. Moving forward, the Liberal platform, finishing the fight on COVID-19, job number one. And, it's getting more people vaccinated is going to be a huge driver in getting back to normal. $10 a day childcare, another big, investment in families, in the community. It's going to help get more people into the working force, making a bigger tax base. So it is going to be better for everyone. It's not just a social good, it's actually an economic driver. And we've seen in Quebec, the results of when they implemented their daycare. You get a massive boost. So we need that now. The real estate market, huge driver here in Canada as well. There's some great programs they have. And, if you want a sustainable economy, you need healthy people. So that's investing in, public health care. It's eliminating the backlog we have. It's hiring more doctors and nurses, accessible mental health care. So that's not quite the entire Liberal platform. It's just some things I wanted to highlight it for you today. And then when it's like when I'm running for government, and I want to be thinking about, how are we leaders for today and tomorrow? So I think that ties pretty good with this theme of sustainable economic growth. Because the world's changing, we've hit negative oil prices. And while I get this is a black swan event, alarm bells should be going off for some people. And, I have, like I said, I've knocked on thousands of doors in this campaign, and I've talked to oil workers, and a lot of them, will talk about this, and they'll be like, yes, I see the changes coming. A lot of the 5 biggest producers in Alberta, they've signed on to the net zero by 2050. They're investing in green. So they see it coming from the top down as well. So the world is changing because, this is not sustainable. This is not a sustainable model. The amount of pollution in this planet is, we had the most apocalyptic summer of my entire life in this city. I'm sure you saw it too. The world just can't keep going this way. And I think putting a price on pollution, like the Liberals have achieved, is once again a kind of an effort that touches that triple bottom line: the people, the planet, and profit. So But this is, of course, an extremely complicated issue because Alberta is so driven by the oil and gas industry, and so is Canada. It's a major driver we have here. Like I said, it's tied to First Nations communities. It's hundreds of thousands of jobs in Alberta alone. So it is a massive driver, and it's a very complicated issue. And so what I see is, we're a landlocked province with an undiversified economy. Oil and gas is a backbone of the economy here, but it's global policy. And it's, financial markets that's pushing to a future that's less dependent on fossil fuels. So, Trudeau gets blasted, absolutely blasted for, tackling climate change. But it's the G7, it's the G20. It is the world coming together to tackle this massive issue. And so, it's like whether Alberta wants it or not, the world is changing. And, I put this picture here because I talked to someone in the oil industry, and he's like, yes, I know this is a sunset industry. That's what he told me. That's the first time I heard it. So I thought that picture was quite appropriate. So what's the solution? Do we isolate ourselves? Do we put up new borders and pretend nothing exists? I do not think that this is the way. And I think anyone stoking the flames of kind of the Wexit mentality is doing a great disservice, not only to Edmontonians, Albertans, but Canadians as a whole. So, what's my approach though? I'm not an expert on everything, I'm not an expert on oil and gas. I've had some years of experience now in nanotechnology, commercializing research. It's like, let's focus on what we do best. And so energy is, of course, a major driver, a major competitive advantage we have. Health, you were talking about curing cancer. We have a Nobel Prize winner in virology in our own backyard. We're world leaders in artificial intelligence, machine learning. We have great resources and infrastructure for nanotechnology. And, we have a history of leading in gaming industry, which is worth more than the film and music industries combined. So there's some very exciting things that we have in our own backyard. And it's just like, can we focus a bit more on those and make sure we're setting us up for success in the future? And when it comes to oil and gas, I know this from my work with Nanolog audio building the sensors, like the world is transitioning to hydrogen as the next fuel. So in Europe, for example, home appliances, your furnace, even your stoves, they're trying to move everything to hydrogen. So we've already been investing in that. And I think that's a key move, a great move. We're investing in carbon capture, utilization and storage. And I think another thing we should be thinking about is more value add. As the industry and the market starts to shrink over time, how do we retain more value? How do we go up the value chain in Edmonton and Alberta? We have an abundance of natural renewable resources as well. So Germany, a world leader in solar, much less solar potential than we have here in Edmonton and Alberta. There is absolutely no reason why we can't be leaders in solar energy. We have some of the best drillers in the planet because of the oil and gas industry. And can we leverage their skills into new markets and new applications like geothermal, something more sustainable for the future? And then, going back to that Wexit idea, the world is so tied, and we do need an international kind of profile because the world's so connected. We need to be thinking outside of our borders because the Canadian consumer base is quite small. So if you want to succeed as a company, if you want to reach exponential growth, you need to be thinking about success beyond our borders. And we have to realize we're competing at a global level. We're competing for talent, for customers. It's a tough world out there, and not a lot of people even know. I've gone to trade shows in Japan and Korea and San Francisco and LA, and people don't know what Alberta is. People don't know what Edmonton is. So it's we have a lot of work to do on making a profile so that we can attract business, so we can attract investment to Edmonton and Alberta. We also need to make Edmonton a great place to live and stay. If you want a sustainable economy, if you want sustainable growth, you need people to stay here and love living here. So that's, efficient transportation. It's investment in like the LRT from downtown to West Edmonton Mall. It should have been the first thing we done. It's investing in families and in communities. So $10 a day childcare. And a big thing for me is like arts, culture, hospitality. These are what make a vibrant city. This is what makes living somewhere fun. And like, this is a critical piece to the economy, and it has been devastated with COVID-19. And I have a lot of friends in these industries. And, the only one who's been supporting them has been the federal government, the Liberal government. There's been like almost nothing from the city, almost nothing from the province. These are truly critical pieces to the economy and sustainable growth. And, just as a startup experience, like what do we need most? I would argue customers. Like customers is what we definitely need. And I think there's a real interesting opportunity here in Edmonton and Alberta because we have so much big industry and we have a lot of great startups. And I think more funding that could help bridge the two, pilot programs, beta testing, because it helps get traction for early companies. It helps, you get more information, you get better feedback, you can iterate your products, and then you can also attract more investors with customers. So like if we can focus more on bridging those links, I think that would be a great opportunity to help cement, a bit of a bed there for economic growth moving forward. And just to summarize in the end, we are a landlocked, undiversified economy. And technology and innovation solves both these problems. So that's something I'm definitely pushing for. Like I said, I don't think I'm an expert in every single realm I've talked about today, and it's the learning from people like you watching, participating in this. But we have a lot of work to do, and I think we can do a better job, and love to work with you to help get there. So yeah, my name is Adam Wilson Brown. The election is, of course, coming up on Monday. That's my email, my Instagram, my website here in Edmonton West. So thank you for your time. And that's my presentation.
Okay, so we have a few questions in the chat. Michael, if you'd like to go first.
Sure, Adam. Thanks for that great talk. And you've also led us a startup. So I wondered what you would do to help startups in Alberta and Canada for that matter. The number here in Alberta has doubled in the past 3 years. So we form a lot of startups, but they also often leave. What would you do to help companies form and grow up here and stay here?
That's a good question because I've seen it. I've seen my friends, like right now I know two brilliant entrepreneurs, and they're moving their companies away from Edmonton and Alberta. So how do you like retain more people? Well, you need to make Edmonton, like I said, a better place to live, an exciting place to live. And you also need to invest in kind of these new and up and coming industries because you want to bring talent here. You can achieve a lot, but what would be really useful for a lot of these companies is like skilled, business development people, like who have experience elsewhere. And if we can bring them here, we can start growing companies here. But a lot of the infrastructure kind of exists outside of Edmonton, Alberta. I think programs like, Startup TNT has done an amazing job at educating investors. They've really been changing, they've been exposing more people to the startup mentality, to the growth and the potential that you have. But like a lot of people, we're an oil and gas kind of based economy. A lot of people don't understand quantum electronics. A lot of people don't understand, like curing cancer, and that's fine. It's very complicated stuff. But I think like what they've planted a lot of seeds in terms of getting more attention, more traction, more retention of investment. And they've also been building a community. It's creating a community that's fun to be in. And it's a lot of those not quite synergies, but collisions that happen, because when I've met so many other entrepreneurs, and when you have those collisions, you're able to learn from each other and get opportunities from other companies. And as that grows, it's like an exponential growth. So
thanks, Adam. That's really helpful. We have another question or two.
Yeah, sorry.
We have another question from Brittany, if she'd like to unmute and ask.
Sure. I'll just kind of read from what I put in the chat. But I agree that vaccines are a proven method to combat COVID-19, and I agree with your stance on that and vaccine passports. But other than being pro-vaccine, do you have any actual, like, specific methods or ideas to regain our economic growth? And how are you planning to support healthcare workers through the rest of COVID-19 and in the future?
Yeah, wow. Deep questions there as well. You know, when it comes to regaining economic growth, I do think it's like the $10 a day childcare. That's a great investment because a lot of women have been disproportionately like stuck at home. And if we can get more people into the economy, you know, it's going to create growth. It's going to be a driver. So it's like we need to invest now. And, you know, it might take a year or two and you'd like to see some of those benefits, but I think that type of investment is crucial. And I know, unfortunately, a lot of the healthcare stuff ends up at the provincial level, right? And I've been very frustrated there. My girlfriend is a nurse herself. And so it's been very close to the family, what we've experienced in the last few months. And so how can we continue to support, well, like the Liberals, they are investing into the public healthcare system, hiring more nurses, you know, increasing the minimum wage at long-term care facilities. So I don't have all the answers for you today, but hopefully that was some of them.
Okay, thank you for the question, Brittany. We have another question from Philip, if you'd like to quickly go ahead and ask that.
Myself. Okay, well, thank you, Adam. I like the sunset picture very much. As I'm aware that our cattle industry in Alberta, well, is the largest in the country and also is very polluting industry. Basically, you use a lot more water than the oil industry. It sends a lot more carbon dioxide equivalent things like to the sky. Now, my question to you, like, I mean, now because the oil industry is becoming a sunset industry, so I would see using the same logic that our cattle industry, which is a major industry in our province, will become a sunset industry later. Just a matter of time. So I just want to hear about your thought about this situation, basically, because like these are the two pretty large industry in our province.
Yeah, you absolutely. Yeah, you're right that these are huge drivers. I don't know much about, you know, the pollution that happens in the cattle industry, so I need to learn more and like look at the numbers there. But what I've seen is I know a lot of startups, like how we're consuming food, how we're growing food is changing. Like, you know, Future Fields in Edmonton, what they're like molecular meat, you know, it's like we're changing. And I know startups in Germany, you know, a lot of mushroom-based proteins. So I do think innovation will play, you know, a space here in changing, you know, how we consume, because, you know, as the global population continues to grow, how do we feed everyone sustainably? So you're absolutely right. You know, food sustainability, this is a huge question as well. It like the oil and gas is like so big and prevalent. It like I agree, you know, cattle it's big here. It's but I need to learn more, I guess, to speak specifically to the cattle industry.
Okay, thank you for those questions. We are running a little short on time, so Piyush, I know you have 2 questions, so if you could ask maybe one of those, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for your talk. Actually, I think it's encouraging in this depressing time. Innovation is important. I think the main question that I would like to ask here is that Alberta has lived on oil and gas resources for decades now. Time to diversify. And when you talk about innovation, which areas of innovation will be your priority? Because we need to get the economy diversified and get other industries out here to the public so that economy can boom again.
Yeah, I did highlight some that I would, you know, consider. I think a big one we have, like a major advantage we have, is in machine learning, artificial intelligence. because as a startup, I've been to, numerous pitches. I've been invited to programs around the world, like AI, machine learning. That is a very hot market. Like that is what investors want. And we are incredibly skilled at it. I think what we need some more work on is commercializing it. And the thing about AI and machine learning is it actually it can touch so many different industries, right? So if we can create like a pillar of excellence there, I think it will help, other types of startups, other types of companies with their innovation, because it's going to be such a useful tool. So I think AI and machine learning is a great opportunity that we have here. For sure. And, still, of course, energy, like thinking about the future of energy, like we still need to heat our homes, we still need to transport. So it's going to be a huge piece as well. So those would be my biggest kind of drivers, I think.
Just a follow-up thing, so I know artificial intelligence is important, and especially with the threats of cybersecurity and, all those things. But if people are not healthy, and then I'm talking about the health sector, what about those? Because if people don't even have health or resources to combat those things, what can you do with artificial intelligence?
Well, once again, so like a company I know quite well, 48-hour Discovery, like this is a health-based startup using artificial intelligence and machine learning to help create better products for the health industry. So like I said, like it ties to a lot of different industries, and that's why I thought it would be useful. But I agree, and that's like when in my presentation, we need healthy people to have a sustainable economy. And I'm a big believer in the public health system. Like, the conservatives are always pushing to privatize and, like pushing the brink of the Alberta health system to failure right now. It's absolutely incredible what's going on. It's been horrible to see. So we need healthy people. We need a strong system there. And I think the Liberals are investing. There's always more to be done. There's always more to be done. But I think it's the right direction for our country.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions, everyone. And thank you, Adam, for joining us this morning and sharing your platform, as well as stepping up and choosing to run for office. We'll now move on to our next presenter, Heather McPherson, who's an NDP candidate running for Edmonton, Strathcona.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you, Adam, for your presentation. That was really interesting, and of course, it's always nice when I get to hear what some of the questions are going to be before I have to go. But yeah, I'm the member of Parliament, or was the member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona since the 2019 election. Prior to that, I spent a lot of my time working in sustainable development, in international development and foreign affairs. I worked a lot around the sustainable development goals. In fact, was one of our organization was the first organization to bring together a multi-sectoral group to look at sustainable development and what that could look like going forward, and the implications universally, both in Canada and around the world. So I bring a lot of that lens to the work that I do as a parliamentarian, and so happy to share a few of my thoughts today and then answer any questions you may have for me. And I'd also, of course, like to take a moment to thank Michael for setting this up. It's really important that we have these conversations, and I actually really like the format of this. And of course, thank you to Rameen for moderating us today and keeping us all on track and on time. And thank you to all of you who took the time out of your day to be here today. It's so important as we go into this election that we are having these conversations, that we are envisioning what the future looks like for Alberta, because we do know that we are at a very unique moment in time where how we choose to go forward will have implications and ripples for decades to come, of course. So I'm a graduate from the University of Alberta. And one of my key roles, one of the roles I see as a parliamentarian, is that I want to make sure that I am advocating for post-secondary education, that I'm advocating for the importance of science and technology, and that, as the only non-conservative member of parliament for the province of Alberta, that I'm also advocating for those progressive values that are so important to Albertans, and investment in a diversified Alberta that is prosperous for everyone. And, Adam talked a little bit about the elephant in the room. And of course, COVID-19 is that elephant. And one of the things that we know is that COVID-19 has given Canadians new insight on the value of science and technology, not just in terms of keeping us healthy and safe, but also to keep our economy working. During the pandemic, I can't tell you how many times I heard the phrase that, no one could have known this would have happened, or we could never have predicted that this was coming. I think I've probably even said it myself a few times, but the truth is that scientists did know. Scientists have been trying to tell us for a very long time that we're vulnerable to novel viruses like the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Scientists have spent a lot of time and energy developing plans to deal with epidemics and pandemics, but it's actually up to government to listen and to act. And we've seen, not just here in Canada, but across the world, that some governments listen to scientists and enact policies based on science and evidence better than other governments have done. And while there are different responses, we can all agree that viruses don't care. They don't discriminate. They don't decide which governments are doing a better job, or they don't make the decision on how they spread. The governments and those policies that are enacted are the driving factor there. And when you compare COVID responses over the last 18, 20 months, we've seen very, very clearly that right-wing governments are very bad for people when compared to left-wing or more progressive governments. So whether you're talking about, the right-wing governments that we have in Hungary or Brazil versus what we've seen in Iceland or New Zealand, or whether you're talking about two provinces that are side by side, like British Columbia or Alberta, it's very clear that a commitment to science and evidence-based policy is better for people. And of course, New Democrats will always be committed to supporting those good health measures, those good public health measures, and those science-based decision-making. And in addition to making sure that we're listening to scientists, in addition to making sure that we are looking at the evidence and making good public health decisions, it means that we also, especially during times of crisis, need to invest in things like education, like science, like technology, because we need to be prepared for emergencies, of course, but we also need to build our society and our economy and create a better future for every Canadian. And that's what our party is about. That's what our whole platform for this election is about. It's about building a better Canada. It's about looking at those cracks that we saw come forward during COVID-19 and fixing them, and making sure that we are never in a situation where our long-term care homes are such a shameful example of us disrespecting and not taking care of our seniors. We need to make sure that our economy is working in a way that women can get back to the workforce. I think Adam mentioned it as well, but we lost 100,000 women to the workforce during COVID-19, and childcare is how we get those women back into the workforce. They are a key economic driver as we go forward. And we also recognize, as New Democrats, that we have to invest in public. We have to invest public money in basic and applied science. Public dollars are critical to getting ideas from the laboratory to commercialization and ultimately to the application. And that's for the benefit of all Canadians. That's whether we're talking about economic development or jobs or just improving the quality of life of Canadians. And I have to say, the conservative attacks on post-secondary education have undermined the foundation of a science and technology-based economy, particularly in provinces like Alberta. Here in Alberta, we have seen Jason Kenney's gutting of post-secondary education. He's particularly focused those cuts in a sort of punitive manner on the University of Alberta, and it's so wrong-sided, and it's so disastrous for our institutions and for our students. I don't even think it's hyperbole to say that it is threatening the future of this province. Because we know that in Alberta, we are facing not just a global health pandemic, but we also have this dual crisis where we are looking at climate change. We know it is an existential threat. We know that it is an existential threat for every single person on this planet. But we also know that in Alberta, climate change represents both a climate crisis with drought, with wildfires, with impacts on agriculture and forestry and wildlife, with impacts on our water supply and our ability to sustain our population, but it's also an economic crisis. We simply cannot rely on the oil and gas sector any longer. You know, we all know we don't control the price of oil. And even while oil companies were recording record profits from extraction in Alberta, we were losing jobs. You know, the sector is becoming automated, the jobs aren't there, and they're not coming back. There will be no more of these booms where you know, we can look forward to years of massive profit from the extractive industry. That's not going to come back. And I think it's really important that Albertans face that reality. So we know we have to diversify our economy. You know, Peter Lougheed said in 1972 that Alberta needed to commit to diversifying its economy. In 1972, I have to tell you, that was the year I was born. So we have been kicking this diversification can down the road for some time, and we're out of time. It's time now that we actually do that hard work to make sure that we are diversifying our economy. And of course, unfortunately, our provincial government is heading in the wrong direction. So we know that Jason Kenney canceled most of the investment that Rachel Notley's government made in diversifying our economy. We know that he has thrown public money into projects that private investors are fleeing. You know, billions that went towards a pipeline on the hope that Donald Trump would win the election. I think probably the only Canadian in the world hoping Donald Trump would win the election. And we know he's trying to open up the Rocky Mountains for coal mining, something that is incredibly dangerous in terms of care for our agriculture sector, for care for our water, care for people that are living downslope from the eastern slopes, but also economically a really bad decision. You know, to sell our coal at a very reduced rate to Australian billionaires so that they can sell it to China undercuts our steel production. You know, destroys any sort of tourism opportunities we have in the Rocky Mountains, and of course poisons our water and our environment so that those resources aren't available for agriculture and other industries. And you know, I think I mentioned it earlier, but the attack on post-secondary, his assault on post-secondary education, is exactly the opposite of what we need right now. If any of you have been following me on social media, or if you know any of the work that I've been doing in the House of Commons, you'll know that this is amongst my top priorities. Making sure that the investment in the University of Alberta is available. It has been a huge priority for me. You know, Albertans have contributed a lot to Canada's economy over my lifetime. And I recognize that it is now time that the federal government is investing back in Alberta. And we need to make sure that the federal government is taking the lead on this and not wait for Jason Kenney. We need the federal government to invest and to lead in the diversification of Alberta. We know that the climate crisis and Alberta's economic crisis are the same problem. And we know that if we're going to meet our emission targets and save our economy, they have to be the same solution. We have to stop the oil and gas subsidies. You know, unfortunately, Adam, the Liberals have promised to stop subsidies to oil and gas, and yet they have not done that. And in fact, subsidies have gone up over the time that the Liberals have been in government. That's billions of dollars a year that could be used to invest in diversifying our economy, in creating a transition for workers and communities, not propping up very, very wealthy oil and gas companies. And one of the things I'm most proud of with our NDP plan is that we actually have a plan to tackle, to put jobs at the center of our climate plan. And we need this more than any other province. You know, we need to invest in developing low carbon energy infrastructure, in energy conservation and retrofitting for buildings and homes. We need to have new funding for clean tech research and manufacturing, funding directly to municipalities for energy efficient mass transit. Intercity mass transit, I think, is a great investment, and it'll get folks working. We'll support Canadian manufacturing of batteries, energy storage solutions, and alternative fuels like biofuels made from waste. And we will do this in Alberta, because it's Alberta where we need the jobs. It's Alberta where the workers and their communities are running out of options. So as the world turns away from fossil fuels, this presents this really incredible opportunity for Alberta. You know, I've talked to so many folks during this election campaign and even before, and there's often this sort of fear of the future in Alberta, but I don't think that's the way we should be looking at it. The potential, the opportunity for Alberta to be a real leader in this area is incredible. You know, we have so many strengths that we can build on, the very things that you are all working on. We have academic leadership. We have an expert workforce in engineering, in smart construction, in artificial intelligence, nanotech, agriculture, and so many other sectors. You know, this is stuff that you guys are the experts in, you guys know about. So I don't have to tell you, you already know this. And we could be a leader in global energy as well. The future will have to, of course, be a mix of energy solutions. Oil and gas is not going to be going away. It's going to be part of that. But we also have the geology and the geography to lead in solar, wind, and geothermal production if Canada makes it a priority. And we have to address the crisis in post-secondary education. There is literally nothing more wrong-headed in my mind than Jason Kenney's gutting of post-secondary education. This is the opposite of what we need. So again, we need the federal government to help. We need additional investment, not just in research grants and infrastructure, but also in student grants and direct funding to post-secondary education. I introduced a private members bill to separate the federal post-secondary funding from social transfer to make sure it actually goes to our post-secondary institutions, and to attach strings so that premiers like Jason Kenney can't divert those dollars. So of course, if I am reelected, I'll be retabling that legislation as soon as the House sits again. A few other things that I think are really important just to point out quickly before I take questions is, you know, New Democrats are committed to universal public health care that is publicly delivered and that is accessible to everyone. That will include things like making sure that we have access to pharmacare, that those who can't afford it have access to dental care, that there are mental health care supports. We'll do everything in our power to resist those attempts to privatize our healthcare system. You know, we know Jason Kenney and Tyler Shandor are trying to bring in an American style system, and we will push back against it. We need to fix those holes. We need to make sure that there are all the supports that Canadians need to ensure their healthcare system is working. You know, what I'm seeing on the front lines of our healthcare workers right now is breaking my heart. The fourth wave was entirely preventable, and yet we have a demoralized healthcare working staff. We have an ICU that is at the point of collapse. It's extremely frustrating. This was entirely preventable. You know, and I think that we also need to look at some of the promises that have been made by the other platforms. You know, I think pharmacare is vital. The Liberals have promised pharmacare for 25 years and have had the support of the NDP to bring it forward for the last, you know, number of years and have not chosen to do that. We need to make sure that we're looking at mental health care for uninsured Canadians. We need to make sure that we're fixing the long-term care system so that there is a long-term care guarantee and that profit is taken out of long-term care. We need to invest in public care facilities. So these are some of the things that I think are vital. Obviously, childcare is essential, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on that. And then just a few other quick things. We're committed to declaring high-speed internet an essential service, making sure every Canadian has access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband within 4 years. And we're committed to enacting all of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action. You know, we have an excellent roadmap with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report. So let's use that roadmap. Let's actually get to where we need to get in terms of reconciliation. And it's also time, the last thing I will say is, it's also time that we reform our tax system. You know, we know that over the past 4 decades, the tax burden has shifted from corporations and the wealthy to middle-class income workers. We need to change that. We will institute a tax on wealth above 10 million. We'll close the tax loopholes that benefit the wealthy, and we'll go after companies and individuals that use offshore tax havens to avoid paying their fair share. You know, there's so many solutions that we have. There's so many things that we can do to make sure that we are moving in the right direction in Alberta. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Investment in our post-secondary is one of those key things. Making sure that we are looking towards the future and the opportunity it brings is a exciting opportunity for all of us. And so I really look forward to chatting with you about it, asking if you have any questions for me. I'm happy to answer. And yeah, thanks for letting me join you today.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Heather. Our first question will be from Michael Wainfeld. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. So I've listened to both you and Andrew, and it's been interesting and exciting to listen to what you both have suggested. I think because this is Alberta, there's been a tendency to look at the oil industry and energy, but we have a huge research investment in medical, on the medical side. And what worries me, I've mentioned two things. First is that the funding for CIHR, for example, and NSERC too, but I look more at CIHR, has really plateaued over the last few years. It started with Harper, but unfortunately, I haven't seen the Liberals invest sufficiently either in CIHR. And we have to recognize that that research is the wellspring for all the medical, or for most of the medical research that and discoveries that occur in Canada. And the second problem that we have on the medical research side is the well-known Valley of Death. You can do fantastic work in the lab. You can translate it almost to the point where it might go to the clinic or to the market, and then the investment dries up. And so we need to see something, increased funding for both discovery research and to get us over this valley of death. And what worries me is that all the, if you come up with a new valve for an oil pipeline, it's not difficult to get that investment in Alberta. Mm-hmm. But for medical research, where we really need big dollars, I mean, clinical trials are not cheap. And you need to get a phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial before you can even interest big pharma. So how are we going to handle both the funding for discovery research and to get us over the valley of death?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Nice to see you, Michael. And I just wanted to point out, I think it's Adam, not Andrew, that we're that we're here with. But honestly, we've heard this time and time again. Very simply, we need to make sure that there is increased funding for research, for both basic and applied science. And you're right, there these massive cuts and this sort of massive ideology of not listening to scientists and muzzling scientists did happen under Stephen Harper. It happened during that Harper year. There was no interest in listening to scientists. That these were ideological decisions being made, not evidence-based decisions. And that's, of course, a terrible way to make policy decisions. But you're also right in that those did not come back when we saw the government change. So that is a problem. And for me, I think that really it's all about choices. It's all about saying, these are clearly areas where we need to invest in. If nothing else, surely COVID-19, a global health pandemic, has shown us the importance in investing in health research. But I also think it's a little bit of that part of how we define ourselves in Alberta. And I think, I was speaking to someone on the doorsteps that is a health data. She deals with health data and inputs health data and is a statistician for health data. And she was basically talking about the incredible value in a knowledge economy of health data and how valuable it is, and how in some areas it's more valuable than our oil and gas sector. And I think we often see ourselves as this province of oil and gas, and we don't see ourselves as a province of health researchers, of post-secondary education providers, of this knowledge creation, and we know that the future is about knowledge creation. So of course we need to invest more in research. We need to make different choices about how that research is being invested in. Now, I've never heard about the Valley of Death. It sounds very dire, and I do get the idea that when you look at the way that research is funding, that there is this huge failure, I guess, to see that whole chain of getting things all the way through research and continuing on. And so I think, you know, we would be very happy committing to making sure that there is more research funding available, and that there is some way for people like you who are in the sector, who are looking at the funding mechanisms and where those are failing, to input into those decisions. You know, you're the folks that are needing this information, that are needing this funding, and you're the ones who know the sector the best. So making sure that we are listening to the experts is also a big piece of that. Not just the research that you come out with, but how research is funded and moved through the system.
Okay, thank you. We'll take our next question from Gary, but I would just like to remind everyone to please keep their questions short and concise, as we are going a little over. Thank you.
I mean, you're probably telling me to keep my answers short and concise too. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
I'm not Gary, but somehow I got point. This is Philip. Is that?
Sure, Philip, go ahead, and we'll go to Gary next.
Oh, okay. So actually, well, I like the idea of like having this internet, high-speed internet accessible to all Canadians within the next 4 years. That's great. I pay a lot for the internet anyway. So, but my question is about the post-secondary education. I think towards the end of your presentation that you talk a little bit about it. How do you go about doing it? But I just want you to reiterate, basically, as we know, the post-secondary education is a very complex subject that is under the provincial jurisdictions, but is the federal government provide the funding for research. So it's two different things. So you just talk about the research side of it, but the Jason Kenney governments, they cut a lot of basic funding to the university. Mm-hmm. But as a federal government, how do you go about helping the university or all the post-secondary institutions? So that's my question. And I think you mentioned something about it to ensure that they cannot do things like that, like to cut the basic funding to the university. So could you please like elaborate a little bit more on that point?
Absolutely, great question. Thank you, Philip. So first of all, you are right. A lot of this is provincial in nature, and you know, before Jason Kenney came in, the University of Alberta had a $1 billion infrastructure deficit already. So already there was clearly a problem in how funding was being allocated to the universities. In the last sitting of the House, I tabled some legislation. It was the Post-Secondary Education Act, and what it is, we worked with a lot of different experts to write this legislation. But in essence, what it does is it takes the federal transfer payments to the province. It pulls out that amount of money that is meant to go to post-secondary institutions, and it ties some strings to that. So it ensures that the funds that go to the provinces from the federal government that would be used for post-secondary education, have to be used for post-secondary education. They have to be used to make tuition more accessible for all students, and they have to be used to ensure that the staffing within the universities is appropriate, and that includes research staffing and teaching staffing as well. So that's what that piece of legislation that I tabled had proposed, and we did work with a number of experts just to make sure that was going to be appropriate and it was going to be possible. And so that's one tool that we have in our toolbox. The other one, though, that I would really like to explore is, I know that post-secondary funding is provincial in scope, but what I'd like to see is that there be some grants or some funding that can go to the universities directly. and sidestep the province. And that is only because at this moment in time in Alberta, our government is anti-education, it's anti-science, and it's anti-research. And so we have to sidestep them. You know, a perfect example of that is Campus Saint-Jean. I've been fighting very hard to make sure that we keep Campus Saint-Jean. At the moment, the government has come forward with a 95% match for Alberta. So the Alberta government would only need to come up with 5%. But if they don't, the federal government still needs to step up. And the reason for that is we can't meet our charter obligations for French language unless we have Campus Saint-Jean in Western Canada. Same thing with the other campuses, that we need to make sure that we don't allow the, you know, a top 100 university to fail because our provincial government is such an abject failure, that the federal government does need to step in at that point. So there are some tools that we could use to do that.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move on to Gary.
I'm not sure if Gary is there at the moment, so if not, maybe we'll go on to the next speaker or the next person.
Yeah, the next person would then be Piyush, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you again for letting me speak. I think before I ask my question, I would like to tell the importance of what Michael has said is, I think government has to have some vision about the problems that can come in the future rather than to deal with them when they are here already and have devastated the things like COVID-19. So for that, you know, having some funds diverted towards creative research programs is very important, especially in the field of cancer research. Now I will come to my question, and the question is that, you know, we talked about automation in the oil industries and gas industries that has led to loss of the jobs. The problem that I see is that, you know, automation has become a part of the society, doesn't matter which field it is, and slowly they have taken over most of the industries, and so the people are losing the jobs. So, including green energy. So what would you do to, basically there has to be some other plan to fight the job losses, you know?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And you're right, many industries are automating. First of all, I want to say thank you for the comment on health research and cancer research. I think that's something that's so important. And I think that there is a need for us to be using the experts that we have within those research communities to develop the right solutions for those. But in terms of automation, I mean, there's a few things. We know that as we go forward, that this is going to be more of a knowledge economy that we're working in. And there can be no better way to invest in a knowledge economy than investing in our post-secondary institutions. You know, it also allows us to throw to make sure that we're investing in those technologies, in the technology transfer that's happening. So I think all of those things really do help. But one thing I'll say as well is that I think that we may want to look in Alberta, in Canada, we may want to look at some of the potential around a guaranteed livable basic income. You know, as the nature of work changes, as the nature of how we live as a society, I guess, changes, we may want to look at that, and we may want to see if that has the potential to meet some of the needs of those that will not be able to find work because so many of these jobs are becoming automated. I think the CERB has been the CERB and now the CRB has been a perfect example of seeing how that works in society and what that would look like. But yeah, you know, we need to have direct funding to municipalities and organizations like innovation labs. We need to be investing in post-secondary. We need to make sure that we're recognizing that going forward, it will be a knowledge economy. It will be a much different looking economy than that we've had in the past. And we need to prepare our young people for it. The other piece that I'll just say, Push, about this is that if we fail to do this right, if we fail to envision a future for Alberta that is forward-looking and provides opportunity, young people will leave. You know, we are already seeing that. We are already hearing from young people that they are worried about a future in this province. And as a mother of teenagers, that breaks my heart. So I do want to make sure that incredible value we have of our young people in Alberta stay here, and that we're able to keep them here.
Okay, thank you. And Gary is here, so our last question will be from him.
Hi, good morning. I don't know if you guys have seen the report from CBC News about the precautionary principle regarding to airborne possibility for COVID, and then now it's still under the process. And I faced a similar stuff during the beginning of the pandemic regarding to COVID, where that was like 2020 in February and March. One of my friends, he's an internist, and then I talking about and showing some papers I saw on the WHO's. Then basically his attitude is similar to what I saw on CBC News. Those doctors basically they don't want to change the orthodox. They don't want to change it. They say, oh, because there's just not enough evidence. So that's kind of a very detrimental for science, that if the cases or the papers that from mainland China or from some area of the world, they discard it. If it's somewhere else from Europe or Japan, they'll take it. So I wonder, like, that's kind of very detrimental for the science. And I'm a scientist myself. I'm a meteorologist. So I see that as kind of mixing into sort of this sort of kind of bias. Definitely not gonna push our scientific paper. At the same time, not good for advertising abroad for inviting atmosphere. So I don't know how are we going to fix the whole thing, because having a cohesive society is the most important for stable society. And some of my neighbors that one of my friends, she's from Hong Kong, got 2 kids. She's actually thinking about leaving Canada because she feels threatened with all this geopolitical crap and then what the right wings in this country is trying to do with some agents. And I myself also face similar stuff in Edmonton, Costco, then telling me to go back to Asia. And then whereas I lived in Canada for the past 24 years. So that was kind of fucking weird. But anyway, sorry about swear. I was a little bit, didn't really like the encounter there. So what are the strategy that you guys have to maintain this whole, first of all, the atmosphere of the whole Canada, and then slowly into how do we get the fairness of treating the data for the scientific papers? That was my questions. That was pretty big for everything.
Thanks, Gary. Well, first of all, I have to say, like, I'm so sorry that you had to experience that racism. It's completely unacceptable. And you're right, we are seeing a rise of South Asian hate and, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And, that a lot of this, what's happening is really, really brutal and horrifying. So I am really sorry that you had to experience that. And I'm going to be trying to work with my other parliamentarians to make sure that we do have ways to deal with that in a more appropriate manner. And that will include things like our online hate legislation and making sure that we are having race desegregated data on what is happening with regards to crimes in Canada and across the country. In terms of your question on scientific bias, I have to say, like, we know that increasingly the problems that are facing humanity are global in scope. I've said this many times before, and I'm grappling in my mind with what that looks like in terms of being a politician, because of course we have these global problems. We have global health pandemics, we have the climate crisis, massive global inequality, and yet on the other side we don't really have strong global mechanisms, governance mechanisms in place. The United Nations has not been empowered to do that role. So that already is a little bit of a problem. In terms of scientific bias, though, I, as a politician, as a non-scientist, I have to trust that the scientific community will find the right answers, through peer review, through careful evaluation of evidence. And I think that really government has very little business in advocating on behalf of, individuals or countries or scientific theories. What we need to do is we need to trust that scientists that have the job to advise government will look at all of the documentation, all of the evidence that's presented, because I don't think I should be making scientific decisions. I think that revolves with the scientists and the experts in the field. So of course, any bias that is not scientific, that is not based on good information is something that we have to push against, that we have to stand against. And I don't like the idea that we would discount some scientific information if it comes from one country or another. So I will continue to put my faith that scientists, through peer review, through careful evaluation of evidence, will come up with the right answer, and certainly would not be supportive of anyone that thought that scientific research that comes from one area or another is less valid.
Okay, so now we are out of time. I'd like to thank the audience for all of their great questions, and thank you, Heather, for participating in this forum and joining us today.
Thanks for
Adam
having me.
did have to leave, but it was great to hear from both of you, and it was great to learn about your platforms. Michael, if you'd like to say a few words.
I'd also like to thank the speakers for taking the time out of their busy schedules today. It's a very important week, and I hope that everybody gained a little bit of information here to help inform their vote. I'd like to thank Aaron for helping to support today's event, all of the participants for coming on board, asking questions. I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and do feel free to join us at our next event on September the 21st, where we will have a forum of the mayoral candidates here in Edmonton to hear their views. Thanks again. Have a great weekend. I really appreciate your time.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Heather.